the security of our operations or constrain the ability of our armed forces to act quickly and decisively.
For the second time since Saturday, the Syrian military thought it was under attack. Reports from the region Monday night claimed more missiles struck, this time at the Shayrat air base outside Homs, where the U.S. launched 59 missiles a year ago. Confusion ensued, showing just how jumpy the Syrian military is right now. Syrian state TV blamed Israel and the U.S. for an electronic attack, causing the false alarm. The Pentagon was forced to issue a statement last night. Quote, "There are no U.S. or coalition operations in that area around Homs. We don't have anything additional to provide." Fox News has learned deception did play a key role in the strike against Assad's chemical weapons facilities over the weekend. U.S. officials say Assad's forces never saw the Allied missiles on radar and only fired back wildly into the air after more than 100 U.S., French, and British missiles had already destroyed the targets. The Pentagon did not say it has wiped out all of Assad's chemical weapons sites. In fact, they admitted they chose not to in order to avoid civilian casualties and killing Russians. The strategy in Syria remains focused on ISIS, which a military spokesman just warned may be taking advantage of attention being diverted elsewhere.
There has been ISIS elements who have been able to come back and take territory. As I mentioned, some of the neighborhoods in southern Damascus.
What's clear from all of this, Harris, is that Syria is a very complicated battle space, and we've just learned that those international chemical weapons inspectors are now on the ground in Douma after being delayed by the Syrian regime and Russia. Harris?
Yeah, a complicated battle space. We thought we had handled the Islamic State savages out of that, and now we're getting pulled in where there's a civil war that's 5 years old. Jennifer, thank you very much. The Republican chair of Senate Foreign Relations, Bob Corker, and Democrat Senator Tim Kaine have introduced new authorization for the use of military force in Syria, which would replace the current one from 2001 to 2002. This new authorization would only allow military force against terror troops, not against foreign governments such as Syria. Democrat Senator Chris Coons, among the bipartisan group of lawmakers co-sponsoring the measure, says this.
Senator Kaine and Senator Corker, a Democrat and Republican whom I respect and who have worked very hard on this, asked me to join them in saying it's time for us to move this forward. More than anything, I've joined as a co-sponsor in that spirit, that the current authorization that our current president is using to conduct war in a number of places has virtually no limits, and it's time for us to act to provide for those limits.
And I want to start right there with my first guest, Republican Senator Cory Gardner, who sits on the Foreign Relations Committee and is with me right now. Congressman, why is this, Senator, why is this important now? Because can we go from what we had in 2002, or do we need to do something different?
Well, it is clear the administration has the authority to carry out its efforts against terrorism, whether that's in Syria, whether that's in Afghanistan. We know that the AUMF that we are operating under right now clearly gives them the authority to do so. There have been many questions by others about putting some kind of limits, geographic limits, time limits, other kinds of four-year sunset reviews on an AUMF. There's no doubt the president has the authority right now to continue these actions, and the debate on Capitol Hill now surrounds whether or not there should be some parameters placed confining those powers.
Yeah, we've seen mission creep all over that region. I mean, it seems like every time we sat down, what we went for, we moved the game. So do you think that maybe it's a good idea to get the authorization through Congress rather than letting the president go with the authority that you say he does have to move in Syria on his own?
Well, I think this is an important debate. Now, whether we get the actual language right, that's another question. And I think that has to be very seriously dug into. I'd like to hear what the administration's position is. I'm very interested in what Secretary Mattis has. The last thing that we want to do in our battle against these terrorists is to constrain the Pentagon and their ability to fight back. In the past administration, the previous administration, there were rules of engagement that were placed on our men and women in the field that really kept them from carrying out the battle as effectively as they could. Well, to his credit, these were undone by President Trump and Secretary Mattis, and we've seen greater effect as a result.
Yeah, and part of the argument might also be, Senator Gardner, that you make our troops stay on the ground longer if you tie their hands and make them wait until they can actually do their job, which complicates everything. So let's talk about the battlefield, because you know who's there is Russia. You have some strong feelings about what we should do with Russia. And I know sanctions are on the list, but that's not atop your list.
But that's not. I mean, look what Russia has done, and it's not just in Syria. You right now have Russia very much complicit in the attack that Bashar al-Assad carried out with these chemical agents against his own people. You have Ukrainian deaths approaching 10,000 or more as a result of Russian involvement in Ukraine. You have the invasion of Georgia. You have the activities throughout Eastern Europe, destabilizing activities that Russia is trying to carry out, including the activities that took place during the 2016 election in the United States. We've seen murders carried out right now in the United Kingdom against the people that Russia was targeting. We've seen dissidents disappear, murdered by Russia. This Vladimir Putin understands strength, and he capitalizes on weakness. And what the United States needs to do right now is show strength. That's why I believe the State Department, within 90 days, legislation that I'm going to be pursuing, ought to determine whether or not Russia should be identified, labeled as a state sponsor of terror.
All right, I'm going to ask you to slow down there for a minute, because you want within 90 days the State Department to look at some legislation that you also want to work on to hold Russia accountable on a new level. This is not just about Syria. You want them to do what?
Yeah, I believe the State Department should make a determination of whether or not Russia is in fact a state sponsor of terror. Look what they have carried out, chemical attacks in the United Kingdom on European soil. Look what they have done in Ukraine. Look what they have done in Georgia. Look what they're trying to do throughout Eastern Europe. And so this is something that Russia should be held accountable for. And the State Department needs to make a determination whether or not Russia has exceeded simple sanctions and moved on to what should be a critical watershed moment in our relationship to become a state sponsor of terror.
I want to step in and get some rapid fire questions on this, because this would be ground shaking. A game change. If we hold them as a state sponsor of terror, we now put Russia on the same list of other countries that we don't typically sit down with. The president has said in a phone call that was reported to us in the media that he would actually sit down with Putin. He would actually sit down with Kim Jong-un. So how do you see it going forward, the relationship between the United States and Russia, if you put him in this category, put Russia in this state sponsor category?
Well, that's a determination that the State Department needs to make, given all of the information that they have available, information some of which I have, information some of which only they have, and the intelligence officials of our country have. But what we do know is this. Kim Jong-un, for example, carried out an assassination of Kim Jong-nam using chemical agents. We know Russia has carried out an assassination on European soil with chemical agents. We know Russia has invaded Ukraine. They've invaded Georgia. They continue to carry out acts of despicable acts in Syria, being with their accomplice, Bashar al-Assad. And so this is something that I think the State Department should look at. Now, whether the State Department ultimately makes that determination, that's what the next 3 months, 4 months would be about. But the fact is, it is hard to separate some of the actions that Russia has taken now with some of the worst actors that we've been talking about now around the globe for months.
Real quickly, have you talked to the president or the White House about this?
I have not, but I very much look forward to those conversations.
The reason I ask is because there's question today about why the president or the White House would pull back a bit on those sanctions, what they're actually looking at. You put this in the mix and you start to change the conversation about Russia. I'll be watching very closely. Thank you for letting me know this information. And with a former Assistant Deputy Secretary of State, I'm going to talk about you, Senator Gardner, and what you've just brought up. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Let's, in fact, bring in Robert Charles, who served as Assistant Secretary of State to Colin Powell and is a former Navy intelligence officer. Wow, that was some big news. Could we, in fact, hold Russia, hold their feet to the fire, and call them a state sponsor of terror at that State Department level? What does that do?
Well, with all due deference to Senator Gardner, I personally think calling Russia an FTO, a foreign terrorist organization, is probably a little premature. And by the way, it's not an end in itself. Even if you did that, it is a means to an end. It allows you then to ramp up sanctions and set in motion other factors. You have to remember, Russia and China are great powers. We should deal with them that way, but at the same time, we need to hold them accountable.
Should we at least talk about it? I mean,
well, the truth is, every single year, the United States evaluates through the State Department all the actions that have occurred that could warrant naming any country to be a foreign terror or a terrorist organization or a state-sponsored terror. And so I think what you have to do is look at the totality of the circumstances. You always have to do that. And I think one of the things that Senator Gardner is really what chafes and makes him want further action is that I think we do need to take further action against Russia, and we need to be aggressive in terms of letting them know that certain activities are way beyond the bounds. And Syria is in some ways emblematic of what we have to do there. They are complicit, they were complicit, and they need to be held accountable.
So what should accountability look like? Because, you know, an FTO, as you said, if you put that label on Russia, the conversation that they're having already, the calculation that they've made already is based on past administrations who've done nothing when the red line with regard to chem weapons was crossed. And all of the other things that Senator Gardner, I mean, when you start to think about how long that list is, you do have to question. You know,
well,
why haven't we done more?
Well, let me start with something you mentioned early in the program. I don't think there's any desire not to do something tough with Russia. I think what happened in terms of these sanctions that were pulled back is that there's a coordination problem. Right now we have no Secretary of State. We have the intelligence community in transition, and we have a new national security advisor and some spots in that shop that need to be filled. In Syria and making Russia accountable, you know, let's look at the big picture. Russia is clearly complicit in this recent attack, and if there is another chemical attack based on any of the weapons that Russia was supposed to have destroyed and didn't, and that we marginally or partially destroyed, if there is another attack, at least two things need to happen. We need to go in and destroy a portion of his Air Force. That may involve some collateral damage with Russia. And I think we also need to make sure at the front end of all this that we take the remaining steps to get rid of ISIS. In the midterm, which is in the next several months, I think we need to seriously think about a no-fly zone in the south. That would protect Israel from both Iran and Hezbollah, who are taking up in the south. And on the east side, we need to probably do another no-fly zone and protect the Kurds, who are our allies. In the long term, we have to get Russia to think in terms of a successor to Assad. We need to bring the opposition groups together, and we need to think collectively with Europe about how we reestablish some degree of stability over there. And probably that means bringing Arab states into this mix to replace American troops.
Well, and how much have they wanted not to be a part of this? I mean, Saudi Arabia, come on, you could at least kick in, and I'm not overblowing it by saying this because we've been asking them for years, and in piecemeal they may have gotten together, but they're huge players. Qatar has 10,000 of our troops on the ground, so you saw the Emir meeting at the White House with the president. He gets that. Last word from you.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We need to bring more of our Arab allies to the table. I think Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others are probably at the cusp right now. They're ready to be brought in. So maybe this is the perfect time for bringing folks together.
And just in case anybody just popped in and they're wondering why we have 10,000 people on the ground in Qatar, it has to do with our forces on the ground and our U.S. command on overseas soil. That's where we have it. Robert Charles, I want to bring you back all the time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Former FBI Director James Comey facing backlash from both sides of the political aisle as he continues on his book tour. Whether the recent media blitz is actually undermining his carefully cultivated image. Our Power Panel will weigh in later in the program, but first, former adult film actress Stormy Daniels has released a sketch of the man she says threatened her back in 2011 over her allegations against President Trump. Is that going to hold up in court? Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano joins me on that and much, much more. Stay close.
I've seen it all. I've seen politics and government from the inside, and I can see what's wrong with it and what's broken and what needs to be changed.
Wherever I smell hypocrisy, liberals, conservatives, Republicans, Democrats, I will go after them.
We don't have time to dance around the issue. I like to get right to the point. I just come at the news with a different viewpoint.
My job is getting to the bottom line of what is the American people's truth.
Stormy Daniels officially has released a sketch of the man she says threatened her in a back parking lot in 2011 over her accusations against President Trump. The former adult film star explained why she did not report the incident earlier. Watch this.
I would have gone to the police and would have gone, okay, a man approached me. This is what he said to me. He told me to leave Mr. Trump alone. I would have had to answer that question, which was not public at the time, and I would have had to tell an entire police department, and police reports are public record, I know that for a fact, I had sex with Donald Trump. And then the whole world would have known. I was just afraid, and I didn't want everyone to know. I didn't want my family to find out that way. I didn't want my life turned upside down.
Huh. Well, the whole world knows now. This comes one day after Daniels attended a court hearing for President Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, about an FBI raid on his home, office, and temporary hotel room. The judge rejecting a request from Cohen and President Trump to vet the seized material before prosecutors could review it. Laura Ingle now with the details. Laura?
Hi, Harris. Well, Daniels just wrapped up her lengthy sit-down with the ladies of The View this morning, along with her attorney. She talked about her claim of being threatened, what her life is like these days, and why she was in federal court yesterday to watch the proceedings involving the man that she says paid her hush money in 2006 for having that sexual affair with President Trump.
I just wanted to make my presence known and wanted to make sure that people knew that I was taking it serious. I know that there was some flack because he didn't show up to court on Friday for his, and I wasn't sure if they were going to discuss anything particularly relating to papers in my case, and I just wanted to be prepared and get all the facts.
That he she was talking about is Michael Cohen. And Daniels and her lawyer also revealed this sketch for the first time of the man she claims threatened her in a parking lot in 2011, as you mentioned, Harris, to stay quiet about this affair. Daniels says the man told her to leave Trump alone, then looked at her infant daughter that she had with her and said it'd be a shame if something happened to her mom. Her lawyer, Michael Avenatti, is offering $100,000 to anyone who can identify the man. Now, as to what happened yesterday, Michael Cohen was in court yesterday fighting for that motion to keep investigators from going through documents and electronics that were seized last week in his home office and hotel room that could pertain to his payment to Daniels. That request was denied. The judge now saying the matter is moot because the evidence is not available to either side yet. Instead, she ordered the government to give copies of the evidence seized to Cohen's attorneys so they can flag what they consider privileged information. Cohen was also asked to reveal his list of legal clients. Cohen's attorneys turned over two names, President Trump, GOP fundraiser Elliot Broidy, but would not name a third. The judge said the request to remain anonymous wasn't enough under the law. The name was then revealed as Sean Hannity. The Fox News host responded and tweeted this: Michael Cohen has never represented me in any matter. I never retained him, received an invoice, or paid legal fees. I have occasionally had brief discussions with him about legal questions about which I wanted his input and perspective. Now, moving forward, the next court proceeding should take place in a few weeks after all sides have had a chance to look through the documents and will reconvene. The judge said she may appoint a neutral lawyer to help decide the confidentiality of all the items. Harris.
Laura Ingle, thank you very much. Let's bring in Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano. There is a lot to get through today. Can we just start with the basics of where we are with Michael Cohen? This is a man who purportedly recorded his conversations with some of his clients, which frustrates this. How so?
Well, because the conversations are apparently part of the materials that were seized by the FBI, and because his principal client was the President of the United States. So presumably those tapes are there. Now, he has said publicly, I didn't tape the president. But yesterday in court, in the proceeding that Laura just so nicely described for us, when the judge said to the government, what is the basis for the pursuit of Mr. Cohen? They revealed for the first time that Cohen has been under surveillance for months. Electronic surveillance, meaning his telephone, his emails, and his text messages. Who was he talking to in those months? Among other people, the President of the United States. And federal prosecutors were listening to that.
So there would actually be audio of it, but just not by Michael Cohen's direction.
Yes. So right now, everything the FBI seized is in an FBI locker. The federal prosecutors who dispatch the FBI to get it are not allowed to see it until the FBI copies it, gives a copy to the feds, a copy to Mr. Cohen's lawyers, and a copy to the president's lawyers.
And that was a victory for Cohen yesterday, because now they'll get to see, before prosecutors will, what's there.
It's a defeat for the president. Because if there is a dispute over whether something is privileged or not, the federal prosecutors will get to see it. And it may contain something confidential that he gave to Michael Cohen.
And that's what makes this so complicated, too, because let's not get it too twisted. Cohen and the president are not necessarily on the same side here. Cohen is necessarily on his side.
Well, Cohen is terribly fearful, and rightly so, of an indictment by the feds. He's going to do what he has to keep himself free. He'd like to keep himself from becoming a defendant, but they've indicated they will pursue an indictment of him for a variety of crimes.
Why did we need to know the names of the other clients? And I was surprised that, Cohen only had a couple clients.
Okay, this is a little...
Why did we need to know that?
Okay, this is unusual because the government said to the court, he only has one client, we all know who it is. Cohen's lawyer said, oh no, he has more than one client. The judge said, who are they? And that's when Elliot Briotti's name came out. And then, well, there's a third client who doesn't want his name out. The judge said, Mr. Cohen, I'm going to put you on the stand, administer the oath to you, and ask you myself who the third client is unless you tell us. Whispers into the ear, and then the dramatic, the third client is Sean Hannity.
The reveal of Sean Hannity. Right. Real quickly about Sean, he says that he was never a client, and then he wants client-attorney privilege. How does that happen?
I love him, and you know, we've worked with him for 20 years. He can't have it both ways. If he was a client, then his confidential communications to Mr. Cohen are privileged. If Mr. Cohen was never his lawyer, then nothing that he said to Mr. Cohen is privileged.
Cohen says he was a client. Sean Hannity says he wasn't. He may have given him $10. And I've heard people say if you give somebody anything of value, that it creates that client-attorney privilege.
I must tell you that that is a myth. The attorney-client privilege requires a formal relationship reduced to writing for a specific legal purpose.
So anything that is there regarding Sean Hannity can be revealed?
In my view, yes.
One last question for you. Where are we going with this adult film star? What does she want? Do we know?
I think she wants the publicity that she and her
attorney
are very adroitly getting. I mean, she says that she wants a court to determine that her agreement that Michael Cohen prepared, that wasn't signed by Donald Trump, he wasn't president at the time, is invalid, but she's been treating it as if it's invalid anyway by going all over the place.
And they haven't gone after her.
No, they have. They claim that they're going to go after her for $1 million each time she spoke.
Well, that's what Cohen said. Look where he is right now.
Right.
I don't think he'll be saying it
I don't
again.
think she has that kind of cash.
Who
does?
Well, she says she's been getting called more because of her line of business. We'll move on.
Okay.
Judge Knaps, thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. No matter what we talk about, it's a pleasure.
All right. We'll bring you back soon. The battle between the state of California and the White House is on. Governor Jerry Brown speaking out about whether he will comply with the administration's request to deploy National Guard troops to the border. The president has gone after him on Twitter now. And Republican lawmakers may allow a little more time for the Justice Department to turn over James Comey's memos he wrote about in his conversations with the president. Judge, I almost wish you could stay, because if he wrote about it in the book, why can't we see it? Why is it taking so long? Stay close. The Southwest Airlines flight, we're getting our first images from inside the plane. And the news from Fox 29 in Philadelphia regarding the Southwest Flight 1380 is not good. Fox 29 is reporting that one passenger that we told you about earlier, a woman, is in critical condition with head trauma. 9 other people, we're now told, were injured in what happened here. It's not immediately clear if any of the other 9 will be hospitalized, but here's what we know. A Southwest Airlines Boeing 737-700 had an engine explode. Shrapnel from that exploding engine then pierced a window. A woman inside the plane, witnesses say, got partially sucked out one of the plane's windows after that shrapnel had pierced it. The reports earlier is that there was some sort of depressurization that was involved in this too. Now it makes sense. If you're flying, something pierces a window, she gets partially sucked through it. The flight was diverted. They went to Pennsylvania instead of on to Dallas Love Field. But we wanted to show you these first inside pictures of Southwest Airlines Flight 1380. They made an emergency landing in Philadelphia's International Airport a short time ago. We'll keep you apprised as we learn more. And then this is happening. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has asked for more time to turn over copies of former FBI Director James Comey's memos to GOP leadership. The chairman of 3 House committees now want to see those notes by Comey about his interactions with President Trump after some were leaked to certain media outlets. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live from Washington. This just gets richer with information, Catherine.
Well, it does, Harris. Thank you and good afternoon. After missing last night's deadline, the Justice Department sent this letter asking for more time to review and provide the Comey memos to Congress. There are believed to be 7 memos in all. documenting his conversations with President Trump. And the holdup is over classification and the Russia probe. The letter from Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein to Devin Nunes, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Trey Gowdy, chairman of the House Government Oversight Committee, and Bob Goodlatte, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, reads in part, quote, department officials are consulting with the relevant parties. One or more of the memos may relate to an ongoing investigation, may contain classified information, and may report confidential presidential communications. So we have a legal duty to evaluate the consequences of providing access to them. Some Republicans complain of a double standard after Comey went on ABC, wrote a book, and leaked some memos to a friend, an academic.
Law professors and reporters can see those, but members of Congress, including the chairman of the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee with security clearances, haven't been able to see them. So I think that's an outrageously untenable position. We've demanded that we see them, and I think that we will get to see them.
Well, the former FBI director told ABC News the leaked memos were appropriate and unclassified. Investigators for Senator Chuck Grassley found 4 of the 7 memos contained classified intelligence at the secret or confidential level, and that it's likely at least one of the leaked memos was classified at the time. The new deadline is, in fact, tomorrow. Harris.
And thank you very much. You set
You're
us
welcome.
up now to talk with my next guest. Let's bring in Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe of Texas. Just saw him in Catherine's piece. He is a former U.S. attorney and a member of the House Judiciary Committee. You know, I've been reading through some notes here, and I understand that they have not said yes or no on this. What is the significance?
Yeah, they've essentially said maybe. We're still looking at it. And let me fill in the blanks. With respect to consulting with relevant parties, what they're really talking about is the Department of Justice, Rod Rosenstein, is consulting with special counsel Bob Mueller. Now, I don't know why they need additional time. Rod Rosenstein and Bob Mueller both know, as I said, that these memos are largely in the public record already. Law professors have seen them. Reporters have had access to the information in them. And Jim Comey himself is talking about them. But I do think, Harris, at a minimum, it would be as simple to at least redact the information that the department says is classified and do that quickly and get it in our hands. And of course, the amount of information that may be classified has significant implications, or at least it should, with respect to certain folks like Jim Comey.
Who does this information belong to? Because James Comey leaked it to a friend who then, or gave it to a friend who eventually leaked it to certain media outlets. Isn't it belonging to the government? Does he have even a right to put parts in his book and put it in the hands of the media?
Well, it depends who you ask. Clearly, the department is asserting right now that it belongs to them, and that's why they're able to assert certain privileges at this point in time, or that's the position that they're taking. Jim Comey clearly is saying that it was not. And I know he has to be rooting really hard that he's right, because, again, he's handed information to parties that don't have security clearances. And if it turns out that he handed classified information over, that should have significant implications and consequences for him.
Well, I'm thinking crime. Like, really? I'm only thinking crime, because why else would we care? It seems like nobody's held accountable for their morals, although James Comey likes to talk about moral fitness. But that would not be right legally if he gave knowing classified information to people who were not cleared to look at it.
Well, Harris, you're right. It should be. Leaking classified information is a crime, or at least it used to be. One of the ironies here, Harris, is that prosecuting anyone for the disclosure of classified information has been made more difficult under the Jim Comey standard or Jim Comey precedent set in the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Remember, he added an element that you have to have intent to harm national security. You can be grossly negligent, you can be extremely careless, you can take America's most sensitive national security information and leave them in a Starbucks outside the Kremlin. But under the most recent department case deciding this matter, you can't be charged with the improper disclosure of classified information.
Congressman Ratcliffe, fascinating conversation. Glad you were here today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
James Comey continues his media blitz. He's now responding to the president's attacks. But he's not the only one going after the former FBI director. What Hillary Clinton's allies are now saying, and whether the criticism is fair. Fired FBI Director James Comey is now hitting back after President Trump on Twitter Sunday suggested Comey could face jail time for his handling of classified information and, quote, phony memos, among other things. Watch.
That is not normal. That is not okay. First of all, he's just making stuff up. But most importantly, the President of the United States is calling for the imprisonment of a private citizen, as he's done for a whole lot of people who criticize him. That is not acceptable in this country.
A Hillary Clinton spokesperson is accusing James Comey of profiting off the investigations into Clinton and Trump at the time when they were candidates. Nick Merrill tweeted this: "None of this adds up. And writing about it now is going to do no favors for the FBI and DOJ, currently in the fight of their lives trying to repair the damage to their reputation." The Power Panel now. Back from Outnumbered, Josh Holmes, former Chief of Staff to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Michael Starr Hopkins, Democrat strategist and attorney. Josh, I'll start with you. You were nodding along as I was saying that.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's hard to figure out how Jim Comey has managed to do the impossible here and unite the Hillary Clinton camp and the Donald Trump camp in opposition to everything that Jim Comey says. He's done that very effectively. And I think, to Nick Merrill's point that he made, this is doing absolutely no favors for DOJ or the FBI, and the contention that the president has made throughout that somehow they've had a thumb on the scale with respect to both the Russia investigation and the Hillary Clinton investigation before that. I think it's given gasoline on that fire.
Michael?
I was on the Hillary Clinton campaign, and I remember when James Comey came out and gave his speech that I thought it was a mistake for the Clinton campaign to criticize Jim Comey, because he had a very difficult decision to make. If we all take a step back and think about what was going on one side we had Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton meeting on the tarmac in the middle of an investigation, and then on the other side you had Donald Trump talking about the election's rigged, there's no way this is going to be fair, and he had to come out and say something. He couldn't just issue a one-line statement saying,
so when you brought that up inside Hillary camp, I almost want to get a cup of coffee for this one. When you brought that up, what did they say to you?
I mean, that wasn't a popular position. I mean, he did damage to the campaign. No. But I've always said,
were you the only one?
I think that there were a lot of people who had mixed feelings about it, because, listen, Hillary Clinton did have a trust deficit, and I think almost everyone behind the scenes will acknowledge that. But there was also a lot of things going on at the time, and we needed to make sure that people had faith in the election. And I think when Jim Comey talks about whether or not he was looking at polling, I think everyone was kind of looking at polling, trying to figure out how do we make sure the election.
You know what else James Comey has done? He's brought you two together.
Oh, of course.
I mean, Josh looks just thrilled to hear what you're saying, Josh.
No, I mean, we found the one steadfast defender of Jim Comey. I appreciate that, Michael. We've broken new ground here today. I mean, Jim Comey, I think we do have to remember, Jim Comey was the guy who, at the bed of the former, Secretary of Defense during the Bush years when we were doing interrogations, was the guy who said, no, we're not going to do interrogations. I don't have to agree with Jim Comey to say that, but I think he's an honorable man. I think, to your point on that particular piece, I think he's done himself a real disservice with this book, because he did kind of carve out this Elliot Ness type image that it was just the facts, ma'am, and, you know, kind of a Boy Scout. And what you see now when he's attacking the president's appearance and things like that, he moves into the political, basically eliminates that entire line of attack.
Real quickly, Josh, what do you think about the memos? I mean, he based parts of his book on what he knew was in those memos, and now they're slow walking, the DOJ is slow walking, turning over these memos.
I mean, certainly anything that appears in a book should have absolutely no reservations about the investigative committees of jurisdiction. I mean, that should go immediately. If there's any question about that, that should be resolved overnight. I think the larger question is what else is in there. And I think the Justice Department has indicated that there are maybe pieces of it that they want held aside. But then again, it does provide the question is what is he doing providing that, leaking that publicly anyway, if it does have any sensitive material. So, yeah, madness.
You guys stay put. President Trump is accusing California Governor Jerry Brown of limiting a National Guard mission to secure the border. Our Power Panel will talk about the wall, the border, and the man on the right there, Governor Brown.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dana Perino. President Trump to meet with the Prime Minister of Japan at Mar-a-Lago in an hour. We're live in the Sunshine State with new details. Plus, Defense Secretary Mattis and Joint Chiefs Chair General Dunford heading to the Hill for a briefing on Syria. And we have terrifying new photos of the blown out window and destroyed engine of a Southwest plane making an emergency landing today in Philly. That and more on the Daily Briefing.
The battle between President Trump and California officials heating up amid questions about whether Governor Jerry Brown will deploy National Guard troops to the border. The president tweeted this today. Looks like Jerry Brown and California are not looking for safety and security along their very porous border. He cannot come in terms for the National Guard to patrol and protect the border. The high crime rate will only get higher. Much wanted wall in San Diego already started. But the governor says he's already agreed to send troops. They're just now trying to decide how many and what role they will play.
Wait a minute. Is trying to stop drug smuggling, human trafficking, and guns going to Mexico to the cartels? That sounds to me like fighting crime. We've already come to terms, as far as I understand it, but we haven't got any written confirmation. But our National Guard general has been in touch with the National Guard people in Washington.
Josh Holmes, Michael Starr Hopkins, Michael, as you look at this, it almost seems like he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. He wants to use the National Guard troops to put into the conversation that he wants to have about the border wall. And yet he knows he kind of has to send them because do you want your section of the border to be the only one that doesn't have National Guard when you have 3 other states' governors who are deploying?
Yeah, I mean, it creates a political liability, but there's a legal problem here because the National Guard in California reports to Jerry Brown, who's the state commander-in-chief. And Donald Trump hasn't federalized the National Guard because there's issues with posse comitatus, which means you can't have military people on the ground in the U.S.
Legal review.
Yeah, enforcing laws without, a review of it. And so this is a really problematic thing that's going on here. Not to get too into the woods here.
Oh, you did, and you went bilingual. So my whole thing, though, Josh, with all of this is Jerry Brown's trying to make it political, saying that 3 Republican governors of other states have done this and that he'll be the outlier because he doesn't see things their way. Is that putting people's lives in danger?
It certainly
potentially
it could. I mean, it certainly complicates this entire process. But you're exactly right. The politics work for Jerry Brown. California is off the left-hand side of the map, as we know, and basically any kind of compliance with Trump administration immigration proposals is an unpopular thing in California, and therefore, any kind of resistance that he can show is good for him politically. All that being said, it really complicates the implementation of a pretty serious issue, and you saw a whole bunch of southern counties in Southern California counties and municipalities break from Governor Brown and say, no, we need the security. We want a border wall. We want the troops on the border.
Well, and you can understand that. I mean, we don't want to forecast anything untoward, but it only makes sense that if all of your neighbors have National Guard deployed and you're the one section, if you're trying to keep, and we're talking about illegal immigration here, if you're trying to deal with that issue and there is any danger within that issue, you now have told everybody that you're just not going to reinforce the protection. Our border agents are amazing and they can do a lot. But if they're asking for help, there's a reason for that.
I think Jerry Brown does have a point in the fact that the state of California is going to have to pay for this. They're already running into budget deficits. Illegal immigration in California is at an all-time low. Crime in California has been going down by illegal immigrants.
Look, some of these states have had hurricanes. They've had other things happen. And they were able to deploy their National Guard.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I hear what you're saying, but there's got to be money in the budget for taking care of people. That's the job.
They're going to have to do a separate bill to fund this. Well, they also have a real credibility problem, and then everybody knows that all of the liberals in Northern California and the governor himself have no intention of enforcing it.
We got to rock and roll, gentlemen. Thank you. We'll be right back.